The stem of my champagne flute trembled between my fingers, but I told myself it was the air conditioning, not my nerves. The Langford estate gleamed around me crystal chandeliers, gold-leafed mirrors, and at least 3 live violinists tucked into corners like luxury furniture. Everything looked exactly as I remembered, which only made it worse. Celeste was radiant under the garden lights, laughing beside her fiancé as the guests swirled around them. Someone brushed past me with a tray of crab cakes I couldn't bring myself to touch. I shifted further behind a ficus near the terrace doors, hoping no one would notice I hadn't made the rounds. I knew how this story went. I'd lived it before, just not this loud. My father tapped a silver spoon against his glass. The room quieted with practiced elegance, all eyes trained on the marble dais where he and my mother stood beaming. I stepped back, just enough to see but not be seen. "We're so proud to announce," my father began, voice smooth and commanding, "that Celeste and Nathan will be receiving a small engagement gift to start their lives together." He paused for effect. A contribution of $1.5 million toward their first home. Gasps, then polite applause. My heart dipped, then steadied. Of course. It wasn't the amount that stung, it was the ease with which it was given, as if she'd simply earned it by existing correctly. But then he turned his gaze across the room, landing on me like a spotlight. "Of course," he said, chuckling as though letting the audience in on a private joke we wish we could give equally to both daughters. But, well, not everyone chooses a path worth investing in. A few guests laughed unsure. Others looked down. The champagne in my glass tilted. I was still smiling, I think. Somewhere inside, something split, and then I felt it. A look. From across the room, past the noise, past the hurt. Grandma Ruth. Her eyes didn't flinch. They held steady, and in that stillness I felt the first crack of something else entirely, something that would not break but open. The first time I realized I didn't shine the way Celeste did, I was 8. She had just won the county spelling bee her photo in the town paper with a gold ribbon pinned to her dress. That same week, my watercolor of the backyard roses was selected for display at the elementary school office. I showed it to my mother during breakfast, heart-thudding fingers smudged with leftover paint. She smiled absently and said, "That's sweet Ivy. Celeste, do you want to read your thank you speech again?" That was the rhythm. Celeste dazzled. I hovered quietly at the edge of attention, collecting moments that felt like victories but were never called that out loud. She brought home trophies. I brought home drawings. She took French lessons, joined student council, captained the debate team. I spent afternoons in the garage studio I'd set up with Grandma Ruth, an old easel, a borrowed fan, and a plastic drawer full of brushes. My parents called it a phase. At 12, I won a regional art contest. They sent me a certificate with gold foil. It sat untouched on the kitchen counter for 2 days until Ruth finally framed it herself. "She has something they forgot how to value," she murmured to no one in particular as she hung it above her fireplace. Ruth didn't clap the loudest or insist I prove anything. She just paid attention. When I spoke about contrast and color theory, she listened as if I were saying something real. When I mentioned the way light changed after rain, she nodded and said, "You see the world differently. That's not a flaw." Celeste never mocked me. She didn't have to. Her success was a permanent mirror, always reflecting what I wasn't. And I tried for a long time to catch up. But in every photo, every recital, every dinner speech, I was the one cropped out by omission. Except in Ruth's world, where I wasn't almost enough. I just was. And that memory of being enough in one person's eyes was what steadied me as I reached for the bathroom doorknob, knowing I couldn't hide there forever. By senior year of high school, I had stopped talking about painting altogether. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet folding in. One portfolio stayed under my bed. The sketchbook disappeared into the back of a drawer. When I told my parents I'd applied to Wharton instead of the art school I wanted, they beamed like I'd finally arrived. "That's the Ivy we always knew was in there," my father said, patting my shoulder like I'd just returned from some long, misguided detour. My mother ordered a monogrammed laptop case before the acceptance letter even arrived. I wore that new version of myself like a suit 2 sizes too big, never quite fitting but convincing enough from a distance. The courses numbed me. The networking events drained me. I became fluent in spreadsheets, strategic positioning, and pretending I was fine. After graduation, I took a job at a consulting firm in Midtown Manhattan. High floor, big views, a desk near the window. I cried most days before lunch. No one noticed. Or if they did, they were too polite to say. It wasn't one big moment that made me leave. Just an accumulation of small silences of staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror between meetings and not recognizing the woman who stared back. I walked out one Friday afternoon with a box of desk supplies and never returned. I didn't even tell my parents until weeks later. They thought I was taking time to pivot. That was their word for anything outside their understanding. What I did instead was enroll in evening art classes at a nonprofit downtown. I rented a cramped walk-up in Ridgewood and started sketching again, first awkwardly, then with growing urgency. The joy didn't come all at once, but something like breath did. Eventually, I launched a weekend art program for neighborhood kids who couldn't afford studio classes. We worked in parks' basements, borrowed spaces. They brought wild colors and no rules. It was chaotic and beautiful. No, I wasn't making much money. My parents called it playing teacher, but every time a kid handed me a picture they were proud of, I remembered who I had been before I was trying to be someone else. And that's who I packed in my suitcase when the invitation to Celeste's engagement party arrived. The envelope was thick, cream-colored with gold embossing along the edges, exactly the kind of stationery my mother would choose for anything she wanted to feel inevitable. It arrived on a Tuesday, wedged between a utility bill and a reminder about my dental cleaning. I almost didn't open it. Then, my fingers hovered at the edge of the flap before I slid it back in the pile unopened. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter like it was daring me to touch it again. I called Milo the next morning. He didn't answer, but texted back 5 minutes later. "What's wrong?" I sent a photo of the invitation and just typed, "Should I go?" He called immediately. "Do you want to?" he asked. "I want to set it on fire," I said. "So, probably yes." Milo: "I mean it, Ivy. If you don't go, you'll keep wondering what it would have felt like. And if you do go, maybe it doesn't fix anything. But at least you'll stop hiding from ghosts." I hated that he was right. Later that night, I pulled out the worn shoebox I kept under my bed. Letters from Grandma Ruth. Years' worth. All in the same looping script. She never used email, never texted, only ink and paper. One from the year I left my job read, "Your path is yours to name. Don't let anyone tell you it has to sound like theirs to be worth walking." Another, "Some people build houses out of expectations. Some of us plant gardens in their cracks." I read until the sun rose. When I finally RSVP'd, yes, I didn't tell anyone. I bought a thrifted black dress and a new pair of tights without holes. I repainted my nails. Nothing flashy, just enough to feel like I was meeting the version of myself I used to avoid. The night before the party, I packed my overnight bag, sat on the edge of my bed, and folded one of Ruth's letters into the pocket of my coat. And in the morning, I took the train to Connecticut. The house hadn't changed. Same white columns, same fountain bubbling in the circular drive. Even the flowers looked staged white hydrangeas in perfect bloom, as if they'd been ordered that way. I stepped through the front door and into a room I had memorized and never belonged in. "Darling, you made it," my mother said, kissing the air near my cheek. Her eyes scanned me head to toe like an appraisal. "You look comfortable. Would you like to borrow something from the upstairs closet?" "This is fine," I said, clutching my bag a little tighter. The first 30 minutes blurred together. An aunt I barely remembered asked if I was still doing my little art thing. Someone else mistook me for a cousin's nanny. Every conversation ended with a polite pivot to Celeste's success, as though the script had been written in advance. I found a place near the corner of the ballroom beneath a sconce that didn't flicker. I watched Celeste float across the room like she was made of light, every movement graceful, every compliment deflected with practiced humility. She saw me once and waved. I waved back, unsure if she would come over. She didn't. My father tapped his glass. The room hushed. "We're honored to welcome you tonight," he began, arm looped around my mother's waist, "and thrilled to celebrate this remarkable young couple." He looked at Celeste, then Nathan, her fiancé. "As a small gesture to support their next chapter, Victoria and I are gifting them $1.5 million toward their first home." Applause. Laughter. The kind that signals money isn't money anymore, just punctuation. Then he turned to me. "We'd love to give equally to all our children," he said, voice smooth. "But not everyone chooses a path worth investing in." Some guests laughed, others glanced away. I didn't feel the glass slip from my hand. I didn't feel the sting until I saw the small cut on my palm from the broken stem. A server rushed over. I mumbled something and walked no-floated down the hall until I found the nearest bathroom and closed the door behind me. I locked it, and for the first time in years, I let myself fall apart. A soft knock pulled me out of the spiral. "Ivy, it's Grandma Ruth." I pressed my palms against the marble counter, wiped my face as best I could, and cracked the door open. She stepped inside, slowly closing it behind her. Her eyes scanned me the way they always had, not for flaws, but for truth. She took my hand, and we sat together on the velvet bench by the window. Neither of us spoke for a moment. "Your father," she said finally, "has always confused cruelty with clarity." I tried to smile. It collapsed halfway. I thought I could take it. I thought I was past needing anything from him, I said. "But I guess I'm not." "You're not the one who should be ashamed," she said, squeezing my fingers. "They're just too proud to admit they've only ever known how to love what reflects them." She shifted slightly, and I noticed the fatigue beneath her foundation, the tremble in her hand. "You don't look well." "I'm not," she said simply. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 weeks ago. They've given me months at best." My breath caught. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to waste what time I had with tears. I've been preparing instead. For tonight. For what comes next." She reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope. I recognized the lawyer's seal. "Your grandfather left more to me than anyone realized. Investments, property, assets your father assumed were part of the trust. I kept them separate. Quiet." I stared at her. "I changed my will. Most of it will go towards something I should have built years ago. A foundation for artists, for the overlooked, and I want you to run it." I shook my head. "They'll hate it. They'll hate me." "Let them," she said, her voice firmer than it had been all night. "Tonight I'm going to make an announcement. And I want you standing beside me when I do." I didn't answer right away, but I didn't say no. She stood slowly offering her hand. "Shall we?" she said. And together we stepped back into the noise. The ballroom had returned to its polished hum. Laughter floated over string music. Plates clinked. My father held court near the champagne fountain, Celeste beaming at his side. No one noticed as Grandma Ruth stepped onto the small platform where the string quartet had been playing earlier. But the moment she spoke, the room shifted. "If I may," she said gently but clearly, "I'd like to offer a few words." Chatter tapered. Eyes turned. As the matriarch of this family, I've had the privilege of watching both my grandchildren grow. You've heard enough tonight about business deals and polished resumes. Now let me tell you about something different. She found me in the crowd. My granddaughter Ivy has built a community art program in Brooklyn that reaches children who otherwise might never hold a paintbrush. She teaches them to see beauty where others overlook, to find voice where others have been silenced. The room was still. She's done this without applause, without resources, and without recognition. Until now. My father took a step forward, but Grandma Ruth didn't flinch. "I'm proud to announce the formation of the Ruth Langford Foundation for Creative Access, with an initial endowment of $15 million. Ivy will serve as director. The foundation will support arts education across underserved communities in New York." A few gasps. A few wide eyes. My mother's glass hovered mid-air, and because legacy, Ruth added, should be measured not in status, but in impact. She stepped down without waiting for applause, took my arm as though nothing extraordinary had happened, and walked with me into the silence. We slipped into the hallway, away from the stairs and whispers, Ruth leaning lightly on my arm. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but something sharper, like release. I've waited years to say that, she murmured. Before I could respond, Celeste appeared at the end of the hall. Her heels clicked softly as she approached, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I braced for more of the same, another defense of the family image, another reminder of my place. But when she stopped in front of me, her voice was quiet. That was incredible. I nodded cautiously. She hesitated, then added, I'm sorry, for what Dad said, for what I didn't. I looked at her. You didn't have to. I did, she said. I've known for a long time. I just never knew how to say it without breaking something. There was a tremble in her voice, one I didn't recognize. I wanted to be a writer, she said, in high school. I wrote stories, weird ones. No plot, just people thinking too much. I blinked. But they told me it wasn't serious, that I should aim higher. So I stopped. She shrugged like it was nothing, but her eyes said otherwise. Before I could speak, my mother's voice rang from the top of the stairs. Ivy, your father would like a word, in the study. Celeste glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. Be careful. I turned to Ruth. Her hand was already resting on my shoulder. We'll go together. The study looked exactly as I remembered, leather-bound books, no one read, mahogany desk, a painting of the estate above the fireplace, like it was some kind of inheritance in oil. My father stood behind the desk, arms crossed. My mother perched on the edge of the settee, already wearing the look she reserved for difficult clients and family embarrassments. That was inappropriate, he said without greeting. You blindsided us. Ruth didn't flinch. You made a financial announcement about one grandchild. I made one about the other. It's different, my mother snapped. 15 million. For finger paints and public schools, I stepped forward before I could second-guess myself. It's not finger paints, I said. It's a legitimate program that changes lives, something I built from nothing. Something that matters. My father narrowed his eyes. This is family money. No, Ruth said calmly. It's my money. And the foundation has already been established. The trust is irrevocable. You're welcome to challenge it, but I suspect the headlines would not flatter your legacy. The silence crackled. My mother stood abruptly. You don't understand how these decisions affect the family. I do, I said. I've just stopped pretending they don't affect me. Ruth placed her hand on my back, steadying. We're finished here. As we turned to leave, I felt the weight lift, not because they changed, but because I no longer needed them to. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of that room without leaving myself behind. The loft still smelled like fresh paint and sawdust. Light poured through the tall windows, casting wide shadows across the studio floors. Children laughed in the next room, their voices echoing through the gallery space where we'd just finished hanging a new round of student work. It had been 8 months since the night of the party. The foundation now served over 100 kids a week across 5 boroughs. We had 3 teaching artists, a part-time counselor, and thanks to Milo, an admin system that actually worked. Celeste came by every Thursday. She helped with grant research, brought snacks, even sat with the younger ones during art time. Once, after a particularly messy session, she looked at her paint-smeared hands and said, I haven't felt this free in years. Ruth couldn't come often anymore. The treatments were hard, and the walks from her apartment left her breathless. But she still called, still wanted updates, still made every decision count. Last week, she asked me to paint her. I did, slowly, carefully, 1 brushstroke a day. Her sitting in her garden chair wrapped in her favorite blue cardigan surrounded by roses. Her face was sharp and soft all at once, just like she'd always been. Today, I hung the finished piece in the front entryway of the foundation. Below it, I wrote the words she once told me in a whisper and never took back. Sometimes what saves you doesn't come wrapped in love, but in clarity. I stood there for a long time watching her watch over us and felt something settle in my chest, not pride, not relief, but something quieter. A peace that had taken a lifetime to name.